Authorities.
This is the currency of the resistance. What is Bitcoin?
To the Moon does not need any permission to talk about Bitcoin, and we are going to talk about this permissionless nature of Bitcoin. From mid-2011, this is when we saw Bitcoin beginning to really attract more and more people. The very first Bitcoin conference was actually in New York City in August of 2011. The first international, the first European one was in November 25th, 2011 in Prague, hosted by Amir Taaki. And of course, you spoke, I attended.
When we first went to the first Bitcoin conference in the world, it was a group of about 40, 50 people. And I'd say half of them were incredibly intelligent computer scientists that didn't know how to share their ideas, and very passionate activists that believed that a financial system that could exist outside of the traditional financial system was an important thing to bring to the world. At that time, it was very uncertain and very unclear whether Bitcoin would succeed. Fast forward another decade, or just under a decade where we are now, and we've seen that wherever I go in the world, people have at least heard of Bitcoin. That was not the case not so long ago.
That's right. The word is out, and these conferences are starting to bloom, and people are getting the ideas in their head about what this is all about.
In June 2011, the price of Bitcoin hit $32. It then fell to $2 by November of 2011. That is a fall of 94%. It wasn't so much about price at that point because it was still magical internet money.
The reason that a lot of early adopters got in was not because we thought that we were going to get rich as a result of speculating on the price, but rather I wanted to store my value in a system that existed outside of governments and banks. It was like, well, this is the only logical option. You know, it's not about what the buying power of it is going to be over the next few years. It was really more about, well, I know that the buying power of my fiat is going to continue going down due to the monetary policies, whereas I look at the monetary policy of Bitcoin, and this is something that is a lot more appealing.
So when we talk about permissionless, I want to talk about another area of the online world, which was the World Wide Web, the internet, how that developed and how that was also permissionless, and the same sort of players involved, including the cypherpunks and John Perry Barlow. So Tim Berners-Lee created the World Wide Web, HTTP, and that was the protocol he invented, which went on top of TCP/IP, which was the internet at that time. You needed command lines to access the internet. And in fact, I think somebody like Richard Stallman still accesses the internet using the old system of just command lines. So nobody needed permission, you just developed. And one of the things that happened in the early internet days was in 1996, there was a Telecommunications Act, which was announced, which started, you know, the US government started to interfere in how the internet developed.
John, what happened to the internet? I mean, I heard you speak in 1995 at an internet conference about the freedom of the internet. It was kind of like the greatest thing since dropping acid. You yourself was a lyricist for the Grateful Dead, and there was this big love-in the mid-90s that the internet was going to bring back freedom. But now everything's encrypted. Everything is being surveyed. The internet has been trashed by centralized governments and the corporations behind them. What happened to the internet, John?
Characteristic understatement, Max. No, I don't think that. I think the internet actually is doing just fine. I think that there is and continues to be a Mexican standoff between the forces of liberation and the forces of surveillance and control. The internet is a very powerful force field inside of human affairs, and even as it allows many people that could never have had a voice in the past to speak up, there's never been a better surveillance tool than the internet. So, I mean, we can expect this back and forth.
It was John Perry Barlow who wrote a declaration of the independence of cyberspace. Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. And he went on to write about the natural law and the social contract, that we are the ones, we're online, we are from cyberspace, and we're writing our own social contracts. We don't want you imposing your human contracts, your human laws upon us. We are following natural law.
One of the great things that Satoshi has made was that he created the truly free market that is guided by the nature's laws, which is the laws of physics. And so that the mining is governed by thermodynamics, law of thermodynamics. It's the science basically that understands the relationship between energy and the temperature and how to effectively use them. So the mining is governed by that nature's law. And then also that mining is based on the understanding of human nature, that we are greedy, we are selfish, but at the same time, we are capable of altruism, we are capable of collaborating with one another. So Satoshi understood basically the laws of physics and applied that to create perfect market free from the state, and also developed upon understanding of human nature. So what we have is man-made laws, and we have seen that the man-made laws are very weak. It's a bit inherently corruptible because we ourselves as humans, it's corruptibility is part of our human nature. So there is no way to actually account for that a fallible part of ourselves. So then here comes the Bitcoin, because the Bitcoin aligns itself with nature's law, which are incorruptible. So this is a way, and then this does not have leader. This does not have external authority. It's bring authority back to ourselves. So because the nature's law already are governing us. So why do we seek for permission? Why do we seek for authority outside? We have to simply realize that that law is already here.
You
inside.
have to surrender to the authority you already have.
Exactly.
You have to surrender to nature's
Right.
laws, that you are a self-sovereign individual. You have all the power you need inside you.
Exactly.
You don't need a president to bail you out or rescue you and save you, that you have your...
Exactly, and it's a hard one to grapple, to understand, because we were so conditioned to seek for permission. We were so conditioned to look for authorities, and we have these laws and all those institutions outside. So it's harder for us to recognize that we have these laws of nature and surrender to them.
Satoshi chose to be a pseudonym, an anonymous person, I believe, because it is important for a permissionless system to not have somebody who rules it or who has too much authority over it. And I think that ethos carries on how people use Bitcoin and what people think Bitcoin is.
Early adopters of any technology, including the internet, are often porn and drugs. So there was that very early on adopters of porn and drugs in the Bitcoin space. 2011, Silk Road is founded, and it's an online marketplace for anything.
Right. Well, porn and drugs, of course, are always part of the technological adoption cycle, particularly porn. We see this over and over again. I would posit, going back to the story of Adam and Eve, was a story that got people to buy the Bible. And, this is really unavoidable and part of the human condition. And we saw it with the Bitcoin adoption as well.
Remember, Bitcoin is permissionless. Anybody can access it. And one thing about having responsibility for yourself, individual economic sovereignty, is not easy. You can get wrecked. And in 2012, we saw the wreckage of Zhaotong. This is the collapse of Bitcoinica. May 11th, 2012, Bitcoinica hacked.
To be Zhaotonged is when you give a third party your Bitcoin, like an exchange, and there was an exchange called Bitcoinica. And when you give your Bitcoin to an exchange, you end up, they own the Bitcoin. They could spend the Bitcoin as they wish, and they could say that there's more Bitcoin than there actually is.
Everybody lost their Bitcoin, they got wrecked. and erupted all these sort of angry trolls like laughing and mocking and don't get zao-tonged, i.e. you get wrecked by going 10x leverage, by putting your coins on an exchange, not your keys, not your coins. You know, if you're on an exchange, you don't own those coins. So here was a huge lesson in individual economic sovereignty. Bitcoin has become the Wild West of finance, with the proliferation of websites offering loosely regulated replicas of the services familiar to those in the financial industry. Perhaps the most notorious is Bitcoinica, a platform offering margin trading, short selling, and stop orders run by a 17-year-old Chinese high school student, Zhu Tong. Users can leverage their bets up to a ratio of 10-to-1 on Bitcoinica, meaning they can lose more than their initial investment. So to be Zhu Tong is to be wiped out financially. And we're going to turn now to a little new hip song, a rap song based on being Zhu Tong.
Wow, that is quite a tune.
You know, so this Zhu Tong, this whole Wild West without regulation, meaning that in our Western system now, the regulators have been hijacked by the JP Morgans, the Goldman Sachses of the world. So would you rather be Zhu Tonged, or would you rather be Jamie Dimon or Lloyd Blankfein?
Right, no regulation means no insurance. Right, so there's no FDIC, there's no backup insurance, there's no one to bail you out.
Definitely not in 2012.
So this is a lesson that folks had to learn, and they had to learn it over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's kind of like this space, when it's a free market, I look at it like a gas stove. And when you're raising a child, your kid can go to that stove and burn his or her hand. And when he or she burns his hand or her hand, they're never going to burn it again. And you can't really teach that lesson. You can't teach that lesson to that kid, hey, when you put your hand on here, it's going to burn, it's going to hurt, don't do it. He or she's going to be like, meh, put their hand on there and go, ah, never doing it again. Yes. We need more of that to happen in this space and at a faster rate. And we don't really need government intervention there. We just need people to lose lots of money and to freak out and to get mad at each other.
It's called getting wrecked.
Yeah.
You got to get wrecked.
You got to get wrecked.
It's the best teacher in the world when you get wrecked.
Have I ever been wrecked? Nuked a few hard drives in the early days. Made some vanity Bitcoin addresses that ended up being hacked by old employees. Poofed Bitcoin into thin air by sending it to the wrong address before address verification was a thing. I would say not a heaping majority. I've, knock on wood, never had to go through a big scam, mostly due to my own laziness. Didn't get involved in Gox because Dwala was kind of a pain in the butt to set up. So I've been fortunate in the fact that setting up exchange channels and such, I've just been too lazy to do, and it served me well. So people that say being lazy never serves you well, they're wrong, period. So there you go.
When old truths seem wrong, when old rules just don't hold, and a new world is yet to shape out, disdain becomes the etiquette, and engagement equals betrayal. When so many find themselves worlds apart, we choose to look for common ground.
Здесь упал 5 апреля 1942 года самолет Алексея Петровича Моресева.
Едем мы, где упал самолет. И недалеко от самолета упал сам пилот.
И он лыжами зацепился за кроны деревьев, ремни оторвало, и он с высоты, говорит, вот примерно, наверное, метров с 30, выбросило его из кабины, и он упал.
Когда он попал в госпиталь, открываю глаза, так повернул голову, кровати стоят, тумбочка белая, а потом, говорит, глянул на ноги, а их там нет.
Ни один боевой вылет мы сделали, и я убедился, что владеет самолетом лучше даже отдельных летчиков, которые с ногами.
Not only did we just have a financial collapse, from June 2011 to November 2011, Bitcoin prices crashed by 94%. Very similar to what happened in 2008, even more dramatic in the financial markets. Then we had the failure of a major exchange, and people's Bitcoin were hacked, stolen, they got wrecked. There was no central bank to appeal to. There were no groups of elite to meet in Davos and say, oh, we're going to rescue these people and save them from this horrible hack. It was just you got zao-tonged. You gambled with your own coins. You put them on an exchange. You no longer own your Bitcoin, and you got wrecked. And you know, what's the troll face?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. So there is responsibility that comes with sovereignty and self-sovereignty. The protocol itself was not hacked. It was the exchange that hosted the wallets and the coins that got hacked. So that's an important point to keep in mind.
It was a very volatile time for Bitcoin, certainly for the prices. You interviewed Andreas Antonopoulos, and he mentioned the shallow pool of volatility.
All right, Andreas, many ask if Bitcoin can survive the government crackdown, but you ask, will central banks and nation states survive Bitcoin? Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've already seen a bounce back from the latest regulatory snafu. You know, Bitcoin is a shallow pool of volatility, and every time someone sneezes, all of the volatility sloshes around a bit. But at the end of the day, you know, this is a technology, it's an invention. And you can't uninvent this incredible invention that allows consensus on a distributed network and allows people to move value around on the internet.
QE3 started in September of 2012. Again, Bitcoin is thriving, it's growing, it's becoming more anti-fragile. It's already survived a 94% crash. It's already survived the collapse of Bitcoinica. It already survived a major hack. Hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin stolen. It's already survived all that. It's becoming more robust, and people still come. They are still drawn to Bitcoin. The next Bitcoin conference is September 2012 in London. You spoke there.
The ability to grow out of the current debt crisis will never exist, will never happen. There's only one solution now, and that's going to be for printing money. And this is then going to be the de facto basis of what is becoming this currency war. Because now you have a race to the bottom. All these countries are going to be printing to debase their currency against each other to ostensibly help their export market to try to grow their way out of this debt crisis by incurring more debt. So this is what's happening here. This is the context in which Bitcoin has emerged, and why it's such a valuable piece in this war that's going on, and why I follow Bitcoin. Because we on the Keiser Report show, we cover the financial war, as we call it.
So QE3 starts in September 2012. By now, the markets are recovering. They're soaring. Financial markets are up. Dow Jones is up. S&P 500 is up. FTSE is up. All the markets in the world. Everything is great. Or is it? Because here we have yet another intervention, yet more hundreds of trillions of dollars. We ended QE2 with a $2 trillion balance sheet on the U.S. Federal Reserve's balance sheet. It will go to $4 trillion under QE3. This begins in September 2012. In the meantime, we've had Bitcoin fall from $32 down to pennies. This is a 94% collapse that happened in 2011. 2012 comes, we have Bitcoinica hacked, tens of thousands of Bitcoin stolen. We have wreckage. Nobody has needed to intervene. Nobody was even able to intervene if it were possible. There would have been people begging, all those people who got zao-tonged, who got wrecked, they would have begged anybody who had the authority to print them new coins that they had stolen because they chose to give up their private keys to the exchange and then got hacked, then got wrecked. There won't be Bitcoin on verge of first bailout for exchange. It didn't happen with Mt. Gox.
No.
It didn't happen with anyone else.
That's not how this works, because Bitcoin is strictly limited in amount.
Yeah.
It is the hardest, strictest, soundest money that we've ever had. Like, you can't just create more of it.
This is the environment in which Bitcoin is flourishing. It's continuing to get stronger and stronger and stronger. The fiat money system, the permissioned walled garden of the central banking and their member banks system, that's requiring more and more intervention, more and more changes and hard forks in their algorithms of printing money. Buying mortgage-backed securities didn't work. Let's buy junk-backed bonds and natural gas bonds and fracking bonds, and let's buy all sorts of stuff.
Right, and Keiser Report was there telling people to keep the faith. I think that's probably the time at which we were instrumental in keeping that community together, because there was a lot of distress in the community. The prices had crashed, and exchanges were getting hacked. But we were pointing this out, that there's competing against an extraordinarily corrupt system out there of banks and quantitative easing, and that this was going to triumph over those guys in the end.
I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Argentina and speak with Tuur Demeester of macrotrends.be and author of the new paper, The Gloom of Central Banking. Tuur, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hi, Max. Nice to be with you.
All right, Tuur, the European Central Bank recently released a 55-page report called Virtual Currency Schemes. Tell us about it. Tell us about the gloom behind this ECB report.
Well, it's very interesting. It got out last week, and when you read it, it first seems to be just about, it could be about any online competition for the central banks, any other types of currencies. But when you read into it, there's 183 mentions of Bitcoin, and they also mentioned that they wrote this report because they got a lot of questions from the public in the past few months. And this has to be because of Bitcoin. So, and that of course raises the question, why would one of the most powerful financial institutions on the planet, why would they bother writing about Bitcoin? Because you could just as well see it as some kind of mathematical puzzle whereby geeks just send back and forth some bits and bytes over the internet. So why do they take this seriously? And that caused me to look back and find some other papers written by the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, and also look back at how they wrote about online competition in the past. And there's reports in 1996, for example. So to compare these two impressions they give is really, really interesting. And it turns out that Bitcoin for them is a totally different ballgame. And frankly, they don't know very well how to deal with it.
One must always remember cypherpunks write code. That's what they do. They don't do Fed speak. They don't talk. They don't try to convince you of anything. They just do. They write code, and Bitcoin just does. It just is. And it doesn't have to convince you of anything.
Why can't I choose my monetary policy? Right? And that's what Bitcoin gives you. It gives you a fixed supply. A fixed supply gives you the choice of opting it in, right? Nobody forces me to use Bitcoin. I am forced to pay my taxes in Canadian dollars, right? So they force their value through how you pay them. In Bitcoin, there is nobody forcing anybody. This voluntary system is fascinating.
That choice allows us to, for the first time, for each person to decide to be aligned with the nature's law, make a decision to live according to a way of living that honors nature and nature's laws. So this battle is out there, it's waging on, and it's going to be intensified. And cypherpunks want to make sure that this choice would be the informed one, so that each person make an informed decision as to what kind of a future civilization we want to be a part of and how we want to use this technology.
At that September 2012 London conference, we talked to Frank Braun, who was a privacy activist, or as they would say in Europe, privacy activist. This was the beginning of the clash of the various groups, because Bitcoin is permissionless. Anybody can participate, whether it's bankers or a privacy activist from Germany, who's wearing a mask, anarchists, cypherpunks. Everybody's now involved.
Yeah, you did see the beginning of corporate interest in Bitcoin. And the venture capital community started to take interest. And their agenda is different than a cypherpunk agenda. So it did splinter the community. There were fiefdoms. There were people that were really actively enraged that the banker types who were kind of like curious now about what was happening in the Bitcoin space. And conversely, the bankers were aghast that they had to share a stage with someone like Frank Braun, extreme privacy advocate.
Frank Braun was a privacy extremist, what he called himself. So he's unwilling to basically negotiate his privacy, and he'll let you see his face if he agrees to it.
I guess that's why he was wearing a surgical mask while we were interviewing him on the Keiser Report.
All right, Frank, first, I'm sure the audience will want to know why the mask.
I think privacy is necessary for liberty, and privacy is not granted, it needs to be taken. Therefore, in times of extreme surveillance, I think we need extreme countermeasures. For example, there are cameras now everywhere, and they can identify you personally and track all of your movements. That's why I became a privacy extremist and wear a mask in public.
Clearly, Frank Braun, the surveillance state is here, hence your face mask. But what about the security of any online transaction going forward, including Bitcoin? So I guess this is kind of a follow-up question to what we've been talking about in terms of what can people do? A few techniques were mentioned at Bitcoin 2012, but what are some of the basic things people should be considering now that we've entered this permanent police state, surveillance state?
You have two areas in which you have to improve. The first one is digital security, and the second one is tradecraft. Digital security means everything like you should encrypt your emails, you should encrypt your hard drive, you should learn how to use internet anonymizers.
The bankers coming into the system, no matter what they want, they can't get rid of the fact that it's the hackers, it's the dangerous guys, it's the privacy extremists that are core to maintaining Bitcoin.
Yeah, that was a clash of cultures, because on one hand you had the corporations and they thrive on organization. And of course, Bitcoin is all about decentralization, bordering on anarchy. So these two came together and the sparks flew. And we had, a setup for, in subsequent chapters, you'll see how that plays out.